Penn and Teller are globally considered as the grandparents of modern magic. They made their debut in the Minnesota Renaissance Festival on June 19, 1975, and they've been recreating known tricks and even creating their own ever since. It's their collectively obsessive nature towards the craft, as well as their awesome showmanship that ensures their prosperity over the years. Even to this day, they still influence artists around the world with their TV show, and interestingly enough, have also indirectly revolutionized the gaming industry. In the early 1990s, the boys wanted to create a video game that would offer a similar vibe as one of their shows. They called the game Penn and Teller Smoke and Mirrors, and it was supposed to be a compilation of multiple mini-games where they would allow the host to fool their friends while getting a chuckle out of them at the same time. For example, one of the mini-games was called What's Your Sign, and the goal was that the game would attempt to guess the player's astronomical sign as well as their date of birth. From the gameplay perspective, it would question the player with vast amount of extremely random and somewhat goofy questions in order to create the illusion that it was indeed trying to complete its task. Although, as you've probably guessed by now, this was all an illusion forged by the development team. In reality, the host would actually input the date of birth of the player inside a secret menu, essentially giving the answer to the game ahead of time. Those 6 minigames were supposed to be shipped together under one label, and I think it would have been a commercial hit if it actually got released. Unfortunately, the publisher named Absolute Entertainment failed to, well, entertain anyone by bankrupting and never releasing the game. The two gentlemen then tried to find another publisher, but no one basically stepped up, so it fell into the deepest of slumbers until a random copy leaked on the internet, and as the saying goes, the rest is history. By the way, I sort of misled you a few seconds ago. Every game on that list was made with the intent of having fun with your friends, except one. You already know what it is by the title of this video, but for those that aren't aware, Desert Bus rapidly became the most popular game out of them all. It wasn't because of their gimmick behind it or how fun it was. It was actually quite the opposite. The game was made during the time period where there were talks about violence in video games and how it would corrupt the player by encouraging them down a path towards pervasive destruction. In response to all the commotion, they decided to show the opposite was indeed possible and therefore created the most realistic and inoffensive game available on the market. Basically, you'll be driving the bus from Tucson, Arizona to Las Vegas, Nevada in real time at a maximum speed of 45 miles an hour or 72 kilometers an hour. That ultimately means it would take about 8 hours for the player to get this destination in real time. Worse still, there aren't any passengers in the bus or any form of traffic on the road or anything really that would distract you from the monotone nature of the ride. To top it all, the road never turns, so you would expect to be able to just put an object or something on the gas pedal and move on. But that's exactly it. The bus steers itself slightly towards the right, and if you go over the gravel or stop the bus, you will be towed back to the very start in real time. You know what's even crazier? Your reward for driving the 8 hours isn't even exciting. You never get to the destination as you're just rewarded a point and asked to immediately turn around and go back. The counter goes up to 99 and it takes 8 hours in real time in order to just get 1 point. You will need 33 consecutive days in order to max out your counter. Now, I know what you might be asking yourself. Why would anyone want to subject themselves to this kind of torture? And I would argue that it is exactly what makes it interesting. It's challenging in every possible way, which is why a lot of people still emulate it. There's even a charity group called Desert Bus for Hope. Their gimmick is that as long as the money keeps pouring in and hits different thresholds for the charity, they will keep driving the bus. In other words, it's torture, but all in good fun. This leads me to why I decided to make this video. My brother was convinced that I wouldn't be able to survive a one-way trip to the end, and therefore decided to sweeten the deal. If I succeed in completing 8 consecutive hours and get to the very end, he would give me the most grand of rewards, a present so luscious and holy that all would kneel at the sight of it, a gift capable of flourishing the hearts of men and women alike as its cold texture warms under our touch as we squeeze it around our bodies. It fights loneliness with its alluring nature, and nothing is more personal and loving. Body pillow. This is a John Wick body pillow, and not just any normal Keanu Reeves on it, but a sexy anime version, because of course it is, right? All jokes aside though, if you're seeing this video, it's because I succeeded and got to the very end. My initial idea for this video was to play the game with my family and friends while filming our reaction every hour. For reasons that will be apparent later on, I decided to change the plans and instead talk about the general experience of going through something as extreme in a group. We wasted 8 hours of our Saturday in order to survive the longest trip we've ever taken in the name of seeing if I can make the cut and win the body pillow that has more pubic hair than all of us combined. Before we get into the game, I have a few important details that I need to share with you. All this technically counts as going on a road trip. I therefore allowed myself some basic commodities. My brother had made me 2 sandwiches for me, and I brought multiple beverages to quench my thirst. Additionally, stopping ends my run and forces the bus to get towed, so if I ever needed to go to the washroom, I would have had to bring my laptop with me, which luckily didn't happen, so I thank my young age for that. Because that would have been really awkward. Lastly, and more importantly, I'm not going to play the original version of the game. For some reason, I haven't been able to successfully emulate it, but that's fine, as Gearbox, of all people, remade the game and released it on Steam for free. It even supports VR, which is crazy. I mean, who would want to play this in VR for 8 hours? Although, this setup does include the option of having passengers, and luckily for me, I found 3 people who offered to waste their time and join me on this trip. My spouse, my brother, and best friend were there with me, and as they were essentially passengers on this trip, they were able to do whatever they felt like doing at the back of the room. At the end of the day, it was my job to drive the bus, and there's no reason that they should have been more penalized than they already were. With all that out of the way, it's time to finally clock in and start the bus. Hey, so quick editing note real quick. I discovered 2 things while I was working on this video. The first one is that if you go online and you write the name of this game, which is Penn and Teller Smoke and Mirrors, and add the word online at the end, you'll be able immediately to find a website that lets you play the game without essentially installing anything. So I could have essentially used this footage in order to make my video. There are essentially 3 reasons why I didn't do that. The first one is that I do prefer the graphics of the 3D over the 2D. The second reason is I do like achievements, and especially for something that is this demanding, I do want proof that I've done it, which leads me to my third reason, which is that this version lets you actually stop the game without any penalties. So I could have easily stopped it, took a break, and then came back, which basically defeats the purpose of this video. So that's the main reason why I do not regret doing what I did. Although if you do decide that you want to play the original, I will leave the link in my video description. We'll be able to directly play it. The second thing is that I couldn't record the game normally with my RTX graphic card for whatever reason, so I had used the Windows recorder, which I didn't know, but it cropped the video and it made it a lot smaller. So I ended up with 2 problems, which is either I leave the black bars on the side and we call it a day, or I crop the video, zoom in so that it basically goes full screen. I decided to go for the second option because I believe that it looks better, but if you do disagree, please let me know in the comments below so that I know next time if I get this issue. So with that all the way, please enjoy the rest of my video. So the main difference between the original and this version is the graphics. The Penn and Teller version was originally made for the Sega Genesis in mind, so it looked very 2-dimensional and somewhat realistic. This version, which was released at the end of 2017, is a faithful remake that desired to keep the feel of the game by keeping its game mechanics while upscaling the graphics. When you start the game, you see the bus arrive and crash into the game's title. You then decide the name of the bus driver before grabbing your slip and punching in for the day. You're then teleported into your seat, and this scene should immediately look familiar to anyone that's played the original. The general layout and use of colors are practically the same. They also copied the design of the driver's wheel, the speed meter, and kept its different components while also modernizing it. Additionally, they also added some stuff like a time meter that showcases the player's descent into madness, as we now get to see in real time how slowly it goes down. They also added a vacation brochure, which is the end game option. Your name tag is now above the driver's window and not on top of the screen, which is only made possible with the new 3D environment. Lastly, they also added a working radio, which plays the recording of an interview with Teller himself on the creation of the game. Additionally, as in the original game, you can honk the horn and open a door, and that's it. You can't interact with anything else you may find in the bus, which means that you can't activate the fan, for example, in the left corner, or even the wipers. You also can't leave your seat unless you're in VR mode, but as there's nothing to interact with, you might as well not do it, right? Quick side note, there is an achievement for this game called Family Vacation, which requires that you bring someone along with you on the ride, which is what I'm doing here. What makes this more complicated is that in order to unlock it, the player needs to enter your game before the bus even starts the journey. Lose connection or spawn a few seconds later and you'll miss it. Also, I was hoping that the achievement would unlock for both players, but I was actually wrong. Only the player that drives the bus will get the achievement for getting to Las Vegas, and only the passenger will get the family vacation one, which I understand, but man, does this suck. Anyways, with my best friend logged in, I finally started the bus and slowly steered it towards the left. Yep. This is it. Well, there are a few cool details in the game, like there are a dozen of cards scattered on the floor, I can't imagine why there would be so many of them, because there's no card dispenser in the bus, but whatever, I guess. There's also a sticker of the Desert Bus for Hope on the windshield, which is kind of cool. There's also luggage above the passenger seat, and it moves slightly as you steer the bus. The same thing happens at the back of the bus. For some reason, there's a lot of trash at the back of the bus, like a mattress, a tire, and even a box of some kind that moves around as the bus course corrects. Yeah. Super interesting stuff. So, I guess this is it. Steering the wheel towards the left every few seconds as the road unwinds in perfect linearity. It's already been a few minutes and the excitement of going through this experience is already dropping rapidly. Both guys opened the TV, by the way, and they started playing Party Hard. The story for that game is actually pretty funny. You're just a regular guy trying to get some sleep as your neighbors are partying as intensely as humanly possible. Normally, the former would try to contact the police, right? But here, nah, he just decides to go on a murder spree and kill a bunch of civilians. The general gameplay loop is pretty straightforward. You start each mission by hiding in the shadows and killing strategic individuals while trying not to be seen. If a body is found and didn't successfully kill the snitch, cops will show up to investigate the area, which can result in an immediate game over. You therefore have to avoid them while trying to lower the number of survivors. Once you've successfully murdered enough people that everyone is mostly separated from one another, you can then move on to phase 2, which is to let your inner Jason loose and finish the job. There are also a lot of environmental kills that you can execute. You can also acquire different weapons, and every mission is set in a new location, creating a lot of artificial variety in a mostly repetitive game. Overall, it's a really simple game that executes its game loop almost perfectly, and the music is so fucking good. It really gets you pumped and excited to continue driving the bus. I almost forgot that I was playing this fucking game. At the 1 hour mark, it was starting to get rough, but I mean, I still had a lot of confidence, right? Like, John Wick is on the line here. He was better off with me than with my brother, so I pressed onwards. And hour 2 was ridiculously rough. Right when it was starting to become a severe test of patience, I was saved by the good nature of the boys. They decided to close their game and set up a board game next to my seat. One of them also had the brilliant idea of rigging the gas pedal. As you can imagine, the controls of the game are ludicrously easy. W makes you go forward and A steers you towards the left. You can obviously use the D button to steer right, but we might as well not mention it as it was only used for emergency purposes. As you'll be constantly pressing the button for the gas pedal, one of them decided to place a lock on it, therefore applying constant pressure. That made the rest of the ride more comfortable as I could reposition myself however I wanted and still press the turn button with whatever finger was near it. You might consider this as cheating, and I see your point here, but at the same time, I was still taking care of the one that actually mattered. I was still paying attention to the game as driving too much towards the left will result in me getting stuck and needed to get towed to the starting position. The same logic goes with the card game session. I get that doing both kinda beats the purpose, but I mean, you tried driving for 2 hours and then refused the offer when it was offered to you.
Oh, you sad, worthless human!
Plus, if you stretch it a bit, it's like going on a real field trip. You get to talk with your passengers, share anecdotes, and have a generally good time. Although, I wouldn't really be able to drive a car and play a card game at the same time in real life, but as there aren't any obstacles on the road and the controls are really this simple, I don't see why I shouldn't be able to do it. The card game we ended up playing is called Galapagos, or Galapagos in French, and it's the one that ends up on my table the most. It takes about 2 minutes to set up, is simple and easy to learn, but offers a lot of complexity nonetheless. The idea behind the game is that you and your fellow passengers are shipwrecked on an island and have to work together in order to collect what you need and plan your escape. That means that you'll have to go fishing and collect water in order to ensure that your basic necessities are covered while collecting wood in order to build a raft. You can also decide to go back on the wreck in order to see what resources you can salvage, so all in all, it's a pretty satisfying co-op game. But it actually also isn't. For example, if you find a gun and a bullet, you may decide to unceremoniously kill one of the other players at any given time and cannibalize their corpse before bringing them back to life with a typical voodoo doll. Add in cars that allow you to whip your allies in order to force them to complete a specific task, or roofies that let you steal from up to 3 players, and the final experience is a game that's as rewarding as the players make it. What's also interesting is that you can play this game with up to 12 people, so for such a small box, it really accomplishes a lot. Plus, there's an expansion that adds in so so much more needed variety by adding a daily scenario, playable characters, and obviously more cards. So all in all, it's a really complete package. There's obviously a lot more to this game than what I've mentioned, but overall that's about it. So if you did like it, I would honestly highly recommend it. More importantly for me at this time, it's a game that requires a basic level of concentration and dexterity, so it wasn't a hassle to put my cards aside and steer the bus as we all decided what our next moves were going to be. At no time at all, I was at the 3-hour mark and oh my god! Some people actually joined the game! There's actually people who are also wasting their time enjoying other people's buses, which is honestly so fucking cool. There's even a person in VR, which just blew my mind in so many ways. But I do have to admit that I'm honestly grateful that they did, and it added something new and fresh to the game. Even if I couldn't communicate with them, and most of them didn't even stay longer than a few seconds, I was still happy that they were there as they were part of it all. Also, I didn't realize it before this point, but we're actually just an orange floating head. Then, between hour 4 and 5, something amazing happened, and no, I didn't get towed, although that would have been simultaneously awesome and soul-crushing at the same time. Imagine getting towed at like hour 5 out of 8. Fucking ridiculous. Something new and unexpected happened that changed my vision of the world and gave me a new appreciation for the game. Something so extraordinary, unexpected, and so mind-boggling that a bug hit my windshield. I swear, when I saw the bug, I went bananas. I unfortunately wasn't recording at the time, but this sudden realization made me go nuts. Then my friends went crazy because that's just how deprived we all were. You could imagine that playing a fun board game with friends would keep my mind occupied, and in a way it sort of did. But it certainly wasn't enough because I had to be interrupted every 4 seconds to steer the bus. Time was passing slower because I was splitting my attention with something extremely boring. So when that bug hit the class, it took me a few seconds to process it. That also just shows you just how repetitive it is. If that ended up being the highlight of my trip so far, then once my spirit calmed down and I continued as nothing happened, I realized that the game got slightly darker. Hour 5 was also darker, and then hour 6 was pitch black. Even the night lights automatically kicked in after a while, and the bus was also illuminated from the inside. Fun fact, the original game also had a day and night cycle, but it was programmed a little differently. The bug did indeed grease the windshield around the 5-hour mark, but the day cycle only changed during the return trip by cycling through the dawn and night phase. One interesting thing is that if you kept playing the game after that, not that I would know why you would want to do that, but if you do, the game had a programming glitch that made the game cycle through it endlessly, so only the first ride was done completely under the digital sun. During my playthrough, it felt pretty immersive because it felt like I truly drove for a long time. Plus, being in the dark also symbolized that I was getting close to my destination, as logically, the rise of the morning sun would bring an end to my torture and get me closer to my one true love. Speaking of my one true love, my back was hurting to the point that my spouse decided to give me a back massage. All in all, you can imagine that I was pretty excited to move on to other less digital pastures. One interesting thing that I noticed was, at this point, I was getting used to the game. Even with the pain and the desire to move on constantly on my mind, I got numb to it and basically didn't mind trucking through it. I had played it for far too long, and the game kept surprising me in small but significant ways, so I was, dare I say, excited to see what was going to happen next? We can say that I had essentially passed through all the cycles of grief. I was first excited to play it, and then I got angry that I was wasting my Saturday playing this shit. I then got tired of doing it, only to finally accept my fate and get excited to see how the experience would change me. I mean, if I was able to survive Right to Hell Retribution, Mindjack, Sonic 06, Gollum, Redfall, and more, and now Desert Bus, then I'm left wondering what game will be my tipping point. I feel like the more I play these games, the stronger my will grows, which is honestly a good thing. That's also the reason why I decided to change my initial plans for this video. After a few hours, we had realized that we had nothing new to say, and I had gotten so used to it, to the physical and mental abuse, that I no longer resented the idea of playing it. I would have had easily continued for another few hours, or even started a second playthrough once I replenished my stock. Although, that obviously didn't happen, as we didn't have another body pillow to pay for my services, and it was Saturday. I mean, I had done enough overtime, don't you think? At the 7-hour mark, the sun slowly slowly rose up, announcing the oncoming end of the trip. We had finished playing board games at this point. With barely any time left on the counter, we got back together and watched the counter go up. Even if I was the only one driving the bus, that doesn't mean that we couldn't feel the restrained nature of the challenge. We were prisoners inside a funhouse, locked away inside the illusion of time, as the standstill of the room paradoxically reminded us of how ludicrous this whole situation was. Slaves of our own sovereignty, the hype was honestly real. It's with impatience that we held ourselves together as we looked at the screen and waited for the blissful embrace of a shackle-free life.
Yeah? That's it?
There has to be something.
No.
Maybe we have to
Maybe a minute.
finish the 8 o'clock? This was our genuine reaction when the counter hit the 8-hour mark. We felt betrayed as the road continued unraveling itself under our feet. At that moment, I started questioning myself, like maybe the counter is wrong or maybe I misunderstood something. At the same time, I wondered where the achievement for driving the whole distance was. We sat there in despair, wondering what we could do at this point. Should we actually waste more time? Maybe drive a little longer? Maybe we should just quit as is, because I do have the footage to prove that I did it. Then, my brother did the math and realized that we were actually missing 10 minutes in order to complete the 8-hour mark, which means that, if his assumptions are correct, the timer in-game may actually be inaccurate, which now that I think about it wouldn't surprise me, because this was indeed published by Gearbox, but I mean, that's another story. We then decided to keep driving with every additional minute pressing on our consciousness until a miracle happened. Something unexpectedly happened in the end of the path, and I just freaked out. I couldn't start the recording software, which means I don't have the footage to prove what came next. And no, I'm not replaying this just so I can get the last few seconds of that clip, so please take my word when I tell you that what was announced at the end is the same bus stop that started the game. In the end, I drove for 7 hours and 56 minutes, which made my brother salty for the rest of the evening, and is honestly still salty about the fact that I'm still missing 4 minutes on the counter. I can also confirm that there are no rewards for doing it other than the achievement and the sign stating that I did it. On a side note, I do wish that we actually get to see the city from afar, or something similar, but it is what it is, and it is accurate to the original game, so whatever. At the end of it all, the famous question at the end is, would I recommend that you take the front wheel and go through the same experience? Well, as crazy as it may sound, I do indeed think that it is worth it if you go in it with an open mindset. I often played mind-taxing games like this one because I think that it's one of the best ways to develop your perseverance. Desert Bus starts innocently enough, and then, the more time passes, the harder it naturally becomes to keep going, which means that you'll spend more and more time thinking of all the reasons you should actually stop playing the game. But at the same time, by forcing yourself through it while looking for ways to appreciate it, you're rewarded with a zen feeling when you put yourself in autopilot and let your mind explore the deepest depths of your subconscious. If I had to explain it another way, this game can be seen as the ancestor of other simulation games such as Power Wash Simulator. When you complete a repetitive task, it feels rewarding the closer you get to the end, so you're mentally enticing yourself to get there because you want that sense of accomplishment. Add some music or a podcast in the background and enjoy the mental disconnect from reality as you get closer and closer to your goal. In both cases, you feel good for finishing it, and that feeling is something that Desert Bus definitely nails. In other words, it's that feeling of accomplishment which is the real reward of the game, and it's one that hits hard once you realize that you finally accomplished the impossible. Although, this is where that masochistic side of me kicks in. Let's face it though, this is as relaxing as the White Room torture, but it's one that made me feel stronger as a gamer. I got to see just how much patience I have and how much abuse I'm able to take, which honestly surprised me. I guess that playing games from different tiers of quality really got me ready for it in a way. All in all, I kept reiterating enough just how good it felt to be done. It was pure dopamine, and if you can do it with some friends and maybe add a prize at the end, I swear that there's hardly a better feeling in the world. Plus, anything you do with friends is always better, so this could indeed be a fun way to spend an afternoon. I mean, there's a reason why Desert Bus for Hope isn't just one person doing all the work. Now, I see my new body pillow with a general feeling of pride. I couldn't have asked for a better present and for such amazing people to share my fortune with. Although, as happy as I am of finally finishing it and having some time to reflect on the whole experience, I'm sort of left unsatisfied. This wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, which means that one day I'll have to complete the return trip alone. I don't know when I'll do it, so don't expect that video anytime soon, but the longer I think about it, the more I'm actually interested in the challenge. So we'll see when it happens. So do like and subscribe if you want to actually see that video in the future. And with all that said, thank you for joining me on this trip. I hope I was able to make it interesting, because honestly, I didn't know how to take this kind of game and, you know, try to make a video on it. Because, like, I mean, this is the kind of stuff I have to work with. So that's why I tried to add in an extra game and an extra board game. So do let me know in the comments if you liked it. I hope to see you in the next one. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.